So in this lecture, we'll look a little more at the site of Knossos. This was a site that was bought by Sir Arthur Evans and excavated by him starting in about 1899. And when I say he was a wealthy amateur enthusiast, he really was able to buy up hundreds, if not thousands, of square acres of land and start digging in places where he thought that he would find Knossos. And of course, he was successful. I'm showing you here a artist reconstruction of what Knossos would have looked like at a certain stage. And it was a place that was rebuilt over and over and over again in its own time, because it was a place that was susceptible to earthquakes. And so what we see that this complex was continuously reconstructed and maintained throughout several different natural calamities. Of course, earthquakes mean fires, so this was probably a common occurrence over hundreds of years. From this view, you can see that it is kind of a rectangular plan, an overall rectangular plan, although I think your book calls it a square plan. But it's elevated on a hillside, and we see many different stories. The exterior walls are surrounded by, and I'm not sure you would call them walls, but they're kind of open to the air and consist of these red columns that hold up kind of a colonnade. And these are made not of stone, but of wood. And I guess it was thought that wood was more flexible and therefore could withstand earthquakes better. What we are looking at here, of course, is an artist recreation, but Sir Arthur Evans himself, and this should come as no surprise based on the last lecture of the snake goddess, came into this site and after excavating it proceeded to try and reconstruct what he thought the palace would have looked like. And I say palace mainly because I am repeating the name that's been given to this. We don't know if it was a palace or not. It has been called a palatial complex, but it really is more just an architectural complex. It housed different kinds of rooms, which imply different purposes. We'll see here in quotes, throne room. We don't know if it was meant for a king or for royalty. We see storage rooms, administrative rooms, private rooms, apartment complexes, but it certainly contained a multi-purpose function and was used for many different things for the Minoans. Given the amount of storage rooms that are present, it is probable that it was a place that was used to collect tributes and then redistribute them to the subjects. So it certainly was a place where you would come and pay your taxes or give tributes to the king. You'll notice that it is a rather confusing layout. There is no clear approach to this place. We are looking north, I believe, and the artist has given us the sense, as pointed out, where there might be one approach over here at the north entrance, and I think there might be an indication of another place to enter over here. But for the most part, it is a very confusing layout. It consists of many different rectangular or square blocks that are piled on one on top of another and all encircle a central courtyard, although we see other courtyards as well. It kind of reminds me a bit of the Neolithic village of Catalhayuk that we looked at in one of the previous modules. And I'm not saying there's any particular connection to it. That site is in modern-day Turkey, but we do get the sense that traveling from one place to another, given this hot climate, you might want to stay high above and in these places where our air could circulate. And therefore, we see a lot of columns and courtyards, which would have given you a little bit more comfort in a place where it was obviously hot and there was no air conditioning. Now, scholars have thought through this confusing layout and have several theories about why it might look this way. The most obvious reason is that it was a complex that was added to over and over again and reconstructed over a long period of time, and therefore it has a bit of a improvised look to it. But there might be more purposeful reasons for a confusing layout. One reason might be that since it was a place that was meant to collect tributes, it was meant to deter people who were coming in to steal those tributes. So if you were coming to raid the palace if you were a thief and coming to raid the palace, it might not be so easy to figure out where to get in and to get out, and also to find the loot that you were trying to steal. Another reason for this confusing layout might be associated with the legend that is connected with the Minoans, and that is that of the Minotaur, and referencing this legend with the home of King Minos. And I'm going to attempt to tell you this story in the legend of the Minotaur to make you understand why a confusing layout might be appropriate. So, by all accounts, King Minos was a terrible king and a terrible person. He killed his either brother or uncle in order to become king, and then asked for a sign from the gods to legitimize his rulership. The only god that responded was Poseidon, and Poseidon, as a sign, sends him a bull, a very beautiful, nice bull. And King Minos is supposed to sacrifice this bull to Poseidon. However, he decides to swap that bull for another bull, hoping that Poseidon would not notice. And of course he did. As punishment for this, it's unclear how this happens, or unclear to me anyway. He makes Midas's wife fall in love with a bull, or he either embodies a bull and King Midas's wife falls in love with the bull. But either way, the wife and the bull couple and produce a son or a offspring that is half man, half bull. And this is the Minotaur. I'm showing you here some much later portrayals of the Minotaur by the Greeks in black figure vases. But we can see that it was often depicted as really a human body with a bull's head. And the legend of slaying the Minotaur was repeated over and over again in Greek imagery. And this was a favorite subject on pottery and probably on painted murals as well. So the Minotaur was a fierce and nasty beast and was kept in a labyrinth that was located underneath the palace. Eventually, King Minos and the Minoans go to war with Athens, and in the war, one of King Minos' son is killed. Afterwards, the Athenians had been defeated, and King Minos is so enraged by the loss of his son that he forces the Athenians to pay tribute to him. And the Athenians have to sacrifice either 11 or 12 virgins to Minos. They are sent to Knossos and they are set free in the labyrinth. And they are sacrificed to the Minotaur, who would then hunt them. They would get lost in the labyrinth, and then the Minotaur would hunt them down and kill them and eat them. Eventually, a heroic Athenian, Theseus, decides that he's going to save Athens from this horrible penalty. And he goes to Knossos, breaks in, and falls in, and King Midas's daughter falls in love with him, and she helps him cheat. She gives him a spindle of thread and a sword so he could get into the labyrinth, unspooling the thread, kill the Midos and the Minotaur, and then find his way out. All this is to say that Knossos is believed to be the place where this legend took place. So either the labyrinth is meant to evoke the idea of this confusing place that Knossos was, or Knossos was a confusing place because it was meant to reflect the labyrinth. I'm showing you an image of what Knossos looks like today, or rather the site. And it's still an active archaeological site and a tourist site where you could go and visit and walk around. And you see, of course, all of these tourists, these little ants walking around the site. You can kind of situate yourself by this big open space, which might have been the central court. But essentially what we're looking at are all buildings that were reconstructed by Evans. He reconstructed it based on what the second stage of construction at Knossos would have looked like, that is to say, around 1700 BCE. And we know what it would have looked like then because there was a major earthquake at that moment, and we can reconstruct the complex based on how it would have looked after that 1700 BCE reconstruction. As I mentioned, the architecture consisted mainly of columns and courtyards. The columns were made of wood, but the floors and walls would have been made of stone covered in plaster. And the plaster might have had beautifully colored murals. And here we can see a bit of one in this photograph. Of course, all of this has been heavily reconstructed and perhaps even invented. Throughout the site, there are incised marks of this particular motif that looks like two triangles up against each other with a line through it. And this refers to a double axe. And this word for double axe in Greek also meant labyrinth or house of a labyrinth. And so we have a symbol that is more or less synonymous with the idea of a labyrinth. And therefore it becomes kind of an emblem throughout Knossos.